Greetings, everyone. My name is Rocky Walker, and I am the Director of Residential Life and Housing at Lee University. Like many of you, my first formal leadership role came in college when I had the chance to serve as a resident assistant. This was a formative time in my leadership journey for a number of reasons, one major one being that this is where I experienced arguably my greatest failure as a leader. So to provide some context, Landon 30 East, where I was an RA, was known as the track hall. 99% of the male track athletes who lived on campus lived on this floor, and I was one of these athletes. I was a member of the track and field team. And when the RA position for this floor opened up, I applied really only because I wanted to have another opportunity to invest in my teammates. However, while the floor was known as the track hall, only 2/3 of the hall were actually on the track team, while the rest were not. And I quickly felt convicted that I had an obligation to invest in all of my residents, not just my teammates. So much so that when my RD asked me to write down goals for the year, one of the goals I wrote down was, I want to be more than just the track RA. However, at the end of my first semester, one of my fellow RAs came to me and let me know that one of my residents said, quote, "It feels like Rocky is just the track RA." So despite my genuine intent, my genuine efforts, I failed in about the most direct and blunt way possible. And I believe a major reason I did so was because the rhythms I had in place did not set me up to become the type of leader that I wished to become. In this presentation, I hope to lead you guys in a conversation about rhythms, why we have them, how they affect us, and how we can change them. I will be relying on these three books throughout my presentation. Atomic Habits by James Clear, that's going to be the primary text that we work with throughout, especially in the practical section. However, I think James Smith and Dallas Willard have essential insights that we must consider if we're going to use the ideas and principles presented by Clear to help us become better Christian leaders. In this presentation today, we're going to talk about rhythms in theory, and then talk about some more practical steps, and then we'll have a few concluding questions at the end that I'll encourage you to think through on your own. Don't stress if you don't feel like you have enough time to take notes on the specific slide points. I'll have contact info at the end if you guys want to reach out and request the PowerPoint. I'll be happy to share it with you. So the first question we must ask ourselves is, what are rhythms? Rhythms are just simply regular, recurring, repeating things. So like in music, you have rhythm when you have the beat or cadence that you follow. You also have daily rhythms when you wake up, when you brush your teeth, when you shower, the order that you do those, and so on. Now, I want to entertain the question of how you develop these daily rhythms. So James Clear, I think, provides helpful insight into this when he talks about this process of building habits through these 4 different laws or steps that he talks about in his book. Cue, craving, response, and reward. Cue being the signal to start a behavior, craving the motivation to do the behavior, the response being the actual behavior itself, and then the reward being what you get at the end of the process. So according to Clear, you engage in this process over time. Cue, craving, response, reward, and then repeat it. And you do that enough times that you establish habits, you establish rhythms that you just do without thinking. Now, this process can be done both purposefully and accidentally. So for example, for those of you that are regular runners, you didn't just accidentally start doing that. You didn't just wake up one day and then put your shoes on and then just start running. You chose to partake in that. But there are some rhythms that do happen accidentally. So for example, what do you do when you hear your text notification? You pick up your phone. But why do you do that? If we follow Clear's model, you have this cue of whatever sound your phone makes when you receive a text. You have the craving of wanting to know what the text says, so your response then is to pick up your phone, and then the reward is you have that curiosity met. You're able to know what the notification was about. And you do this so often that it just becomes automatic to when you hear this sound, you pick up your phone. So much so that there are probably times when you've heard someone else's phone make the same sound that your phone typically makes, and then you pick yours up. There's nothing inherently necessary between the two. You've just done it enough times that it's become an automatic rhythm. And there's a lot of other ways we do this in our lives as well. So I think an important takeaway for us at this point then is that we develop rhythms naturally, sometimes without even thinking about it. We all have rhythms and we seem to acquire them naturally, but why do we do this? Well, to a certain extent, it seems like our brains are just naturally wired this way to get what we need or want. We seek the path of least resistance to get something, and then once we find it, we just repeat it over and over again. That's just how we're wired. But that begs the question, why are we wired this way? Why is this a part of human nature? Well, Clear seems to suggest that it's just the result of an evolutionary process, at least how I read him. He writes that the reason we do this is to solve the problems of life with as little energy as possible. And that was just an inherently beneficial trait. So the humans of ancient times that found the most efficient way to find food, water, shelter, and so on were the ones that survived and the ones that passed on their genes. So that over time, this innate tendency to seek these rhythms became just part of human nature. However, James Smith seems to see more purpose behind that capacity and that God purposely designed us to be this way, specifically to have these rhythms to pursue what we love. Now, at face value, that can seem similar to what Clear is saying, but additional context for Smith's perspective on what it means to be human helps us understand what he's getting at here. So for Smith, it's important that humans are loving beings. We are created with the capacity to love, and we can't not love. We have to do it. As he puts it in his book, the question isn't whether we will love something as ultimate. The question is what we will love as ultimate. And this is significant because our love drives what we do. As he puts it, we live towards what we want. And we do this specifically in the terms of liturgy, as Clear, or as Smith rather puts it. We orient the rhythms of our lives as a form of worship around whatever we're seeking, whatever we're deeming as ultimate. And this is significant because of the effects our rhythms can have on us as they are driven by what we love. So this idea of the rhythms of our life as being a form of liturgy or worship is significant because it implies that these rhythms do something to us. So think about on Sunday morning when you go into your worship service. You're doing something when you worship, but there's something being done to you. So in the same way, Smith thinks that all of the rhythms and liturgies in our life are doing something to us. And a significant aspect of this is that our identity is being affected. So Smith has this quote that he has in his book where he writes, "Your religious and spiritual identity is manifested not only in what you think or what you believe, but in what you do and what those practices do to you." Clear has a similar idea when he writes about how your identity emerges out of your habits. Every action is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. And when you think about this, this may seem odd at first, but I think it's helpful to process when you understand that these changes happen gradually over time. So like a river cutting through a canyon, that doesn't happen overnight. It happens after years and years of the river flowing over the rock and eroding and just taking little bits of it away over time. So in that same way, what we do, no matter how small or insignificant, if we do it enough, can change and affect us. Clear uses this language of like compound interest. So a habit, no matter how small, it may not seem like it's making a big change in the moment, but if you stick with it over time, it can lead to an exponential change. So there's this sense then that our rhythms have the power to change us and how we are in the world. Now, at this point, I think it's important to ask, how much can our rhythms change us? So, to make it more pointed for our purposes, we are all here because we aspire to be better Christian leaders, or at least that's why I'm assuming most of you are here. So, a big part of being a better Christian leader, I would imagine, would be being conformed to the image of Christ. But can your rhythms do that? Can your rhythms conform you to the image of Christ? So I think Dallas Willard provides excellent insight here when he writes about the similarities between the discipleship journey and those who seek to become a professional baseball player. So Willard compares the discipline that he believes Christians should have to those who aspire to be professional baseball players. He writes about children who idolize a baseball player, and because they idolize him when they play the game, they imitate him. They swing the bat like him, they run the bases like him, they throw the ball like him, they dress like him. However, we know that these kids will never perform like these players unless they practice like him, unless they establish rhythms of eating well, training hard, consistently stretching, getting good sleep. They have to structure their whole lives around this goal. And similarly, Willard believes that Christians must do the same thing to become like Christ. Christians must choose not to just do what Jesus would do in the moment, but to pray, to read their Bibles, to practice the spiritual disciplines. And in doing so, they will set themselves up to become like Christ. However, does this mean that Willard is advocating for a works-based faith? Because this seems like there's a difference between becoming a better baseball player and a better Christian. Like, yeah, I can put in the work, I can get my reps in, and then improve at a sport. But there seems to be a leap in logic between that and growing as a Christian. So here I think it's important to note two key distinctions that Willard makes. First is the difference between justification and sanctification. So for Willard, there's nothing about your rhythms that will atone for your sins. You can't be justified by doing the right things. Our atonement comes from the work that Christ did on our behalf. So there's nothing we can do to replace that. There's nothing we can do to earn that justification. And then similarly with sanctification, that can't happen apart from the work of the Spirit in our lives. Like, you can just be a Bible scholar, study it formally, but if you're not a born-again Christian with the Spirit dwelling within you, that's not going to be sanctifying in the same way. However, Willard stresses that we are not just passive observers in the sanctification process. Rather, we're active participants in it. So it's not like the Spirit's just going to come down and then just magically make us like Christ without us doing something against our will. Rather, it's going to be something that we participate in. And this is where it's important for understanding how Willard understands the disciplines of partaking in this process. So for Willard, the disciplines don't change us. The disciplines put us in a place to be changed. So Willard doesn't say that you need to read your Bible this amount of times a week, you need to pray this much, you need to fast this often, and if you meet this minimum standard, you'll experience this growth in becoming like Christ. That's not what he's saying. He says you need to do those things because those put you in a place to experience the Spirit, to grow as you are allowing the Spirit to work in you. So that's the significance behind Willard's understandings of the disciplines and rhythms, and that's why I think it's important for our conversation here to note that the Spirit can use our rhythms to change us. So as a recap of the takeaways we have at this point in the presentation, we naturally develop our rhythms. It's just something that we do sometimes without even thinking. And these rhythms are driven by what we love or whatever we deem as ultimate in our lives. As we structure these liturgies, these rhythms around it. These rhythms also have the power to change us depending on what we're pursuing, especially if we practice them repeatedly over a long period of time. But that change, if we want that change to lead to becoming more like Christ, to becoming a better Christian leader, we have to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position for the Spirit to be using the rhythms to change us, because we can't use the rhythms to become like Christ. However, the Spirit can use them to help change us in this way. At this point, I think we're ready to start talking about more practical steps. So the main way I'm going to do this is by using myself as an example and reflecting upon my failure as an RA, and then talking about how I established a rhythm that helped me overcome this failure. So before you can change your rhythms, you need to know what they are. And James Clear provides a helpful way to do that when he talks about this habits scorecard. So he suggests you list out all of your rhythms and habits, and then you evaluate how these rhythms are helping you become whatever identity you're wanting to have. So for our purposes, whatever type of leader you're wanting to become. And you're specifically assessing how much these rhythms either reinforce or conflict with your desired identity. So this list here is an example of the rhythms I would have put on a habit scorecard if I would have done this when I was an RA. And you can see that while I profess that I want to be more than just the track RA, my established rhythms suggest otherwise. I mean, I have 5 bad rhythms and 1 good. And it's important to note again that we're assessing not necessarily the moral quality of these, but the extent to which they're helping me be what I want to be. So if I'm wanting to be more than just a track RA, but I'm consistently spending all of these other times at meals and chapel with only my teammates, then of course it's going to communicate that I'm just that. Eating meals is a good thing. Going to chapel is a good thing. But those aren't going to help me grow to be more than just the track RA, because my other residents are only seeing me during curfews and during room checks. And if they're only seeing me intentional with them at these moments, and then on the flip side, seeing me always with my teammates, of course they're only going to think of me as the track RA. For those of you looking for just a list of steps of how to change your habits, this slide is it. This comes from James Clear's book again, and it's his steps for how to create a good habit and how to break a bad habit. You'll notice he just goes through the 4 steps he talked about earlier: cue, craving, response, and reward, and talks about the specific things you need to do to either create a good habit and a bad habit. And really, it's just doing the opposite. If you want to create a good habit, you want to make it easy to do the response, do the behavior. If you want to break a bad habit, you want to make it difficult. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the good habit. Here's things I did to help instill a good habit. But if you're thinking of a bad habit you want to break, just do the opposite of what I suggest. So when I was thinking about my failure after that first semester, I knew I had to change something. And I realized that my approach for being intentional with my residents was just to be intentional whenever I saw them. The problem is, as my rhythm showed, that I never saw most of my residents that weren't my teammates. I just saw my teammates more often than not. So one of the goals I had then was to have a regular touch point. And the way I wanted to do that was to text every individual resident how I could be praying for them once a week. I was going to go to my room from breakfast and do that. That was sort of the habit stacking method I had there. So I every day go to breakfast and then go back to my room before class. That's the place I can do it. And then my obvious cue for doing so was a prayer board. I listed all the names of my residents. I posted it in my wall so that when I would see it, I would be reminded that, hey, I need to text these guys and ask for their prayer requests. To make it attractive for me to actually text these guys, I used some of these ideas listed here. So like for the temptation bundling, I had to send the text before I could take a shower. And I really wanted to take a shower because I was gross and sweaty after practice, and I hate sweating. I hate it with a passion. So I was ready to hop in the shower. But before I could do so, had to send a text. I also was fortunate to be a part of a culture, sort of accidentally, that was prioritizing this type of engagement. The RA team I was a part of was really good about doing this, and then the prayer partner I was assigned on that team was as well. So I was able to be around him and see him do it, and that helped encourage me. It's like, hey, I want to be like Ryan. I want to keep reaching out to these guys. And then the motivation ritual to sort of help me is that, like, okay, I know you kind of already feel gross and you're ready to take a shower. Just go ahead and take off your sweaty clothes and then you can text them. So that was sort of how I had a little bit of that immediate enjoyment before the difficult habit to help me stick with this task. And then with the actual task itself, I wanted to make it as easy as possible to do. I discovered that it was pretty easy to copy and paste the basic text template to each guy. So, good morning, so-and-so, how can I be praying for you this week? And I could send that template along with their name and any specific message I wanted to include. And that just saved me time, so I didn't have to type it out each individual time. And then I also had the prayer board above my dresser so that in the case that I wanted to come home and maybe I don't have to do the prayer board, I can just go hop in the shower. If I'm reaching into my dresser to get my clean clothes, I'm seeing it. It's right there. I can't avoid it. And then finally, I limited the number of residents I asked to 5 a day. So I could have done more, but it would have been easier to skip it because I'm like, that's just too much time. I can't do that much right now. I just have to rush through and then forget to do it. Limiting it to 5 allowed me to keep it under that 2-minute rule so that it would become ingrained. And then maybe over time I can add more, but this is a good starting point. And then finally, the reward. For me, hot shower. Send all the text, boom, go hop in. Feels great. For like the habit tracker piece, I was fortunate to have that already built in through my RA weekly report. I let my RD know I was wanting to do this, and then I just updated him regularly on it. And then finally, I missed twice a lot. It was kind of discouraging, but the way I tried to prevent myself from missing more is that eventually I felt convicted to have to write an apology letter for each semester I did it. So I told my guys beforehand I was going to do it, and then when I missed, it was obvious, and then I felt convicted enough that I was like, I need to apologize. I'm sorry I didn't keep my word, and then doing that made me stick with it a lot more because it wasn't a fun experience, and I wanted to avoid having to do it again. And as I referenced on the previous slide, I didn't do a great job with the prayer board, or at least so I thought. I was so inconsistent with it. I didn't do it as much as I said I would. However, it still seemed to work. So the numbers on your screen represent, first, the total number of responses that I got from my residents for the end of semester evals we would send out. And then 2, the number of those responses that said that they felt as if their RA had a positive spiritual impact on them. And you can see that semester 1, when I did nothing, grew to semester 2 and 3 where I did do the prayer board. And it kind of surprised me because I didn't do well, but then it reminded me that the Lord is the one that's going to step in and ultimately accomplish what I would hope to accomplish as a spiritual leader. Like, I'm just the vessel, and I just need to make sure I'm putting myself in that position to be used by the Lord. And I was grateful the Lord did use me, or at least seemed to use me, despite my seemingly pitiful offering. What you do matters. It matters for you as an individual, and it matters for those you're leading on your campuses. So I would encourage you to think through these reflection questions and think about, what type of leader do you want to be? And how are you setting yourself up to be that type of leader? And then, are there any changes you want to make? And through it all, I hope that you can be encouraged to know that there's a lot you can do. There's a lot of ways you can grow, but you're not just doing it alone. You have the Spirit there to pour in and invest in you, dwelling within you. And even if you make a pitiful effort like I did, that can still be used and that can still make a difference. So I am incredibly grateful for being able to present to you all today. If you want to reach out to me to ask any questions or get the copy of the PowerPoint, my contact info is below, and I'll be happy to touch base with you. See you.